Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's jump into today's episode. Let's talk about 5 tips to be memorable. This is one of my favorite topics because I want everybody to stand out with unshakable confidence. The first one is to ask questions and listen. Too often what happens, and I'm talking about in meetings, I'm talking about in one-on-one conversations, make sure that you are asking questions. Because when we ask questions and we pause long enough to listen, people will feel that they are being heard. And the number one thing that most people want is to be heard. We all want people to feel important. And this, in fact, is a great example of something that was told to me as a kid or a older, whatever. When I was young, somebody told me this when I was a teenager or something. Imagine that everybody has a sign above their forehead that says, "Make me feel important." When you can come from the lens of that, what would make somebody feel important? It's not giving unsolicited advice. It's not talking at them, not even talking sometimes. The most important thing that we can do to be memorable is to ask questions and then listen. One of the questions, sometimes people say, well, what am I asking? Get really curious and think about what Stephen Covey said in one of his 7 habits to highly effective people. Seek first to understand. What could you ask that would help them feel understood, that you could understand them better? So for example, it could be as simple as, help me understand your logic around that. That's actually a really great question to ask when you want to say, why did you do it that way? That could be a way to be when you're frustrated. That's a great model for that. But it's also a great model in general. The other thing to ask them, first of all, ask open-ended questions. So things like, tell me more about that. I would love to hear more. Could you share more details? Probing questions like, tell me more, are really powerful. Could you give me an example of what you're talking about? That's another great way to get them talking. It could be simple things like, let's say it's more on a personal relationship or you're at a networking event and you want to get to know someone better. It could be, tell me a little bit about what you do for fun, or what is the next vacation that you have planned? Simple questions to engage them are really helpful. One of my favorite questions is to ask people, what are you most excited about that's coming up in your life? Or maybe it could be seasonal. What are you most excited about for the fall? Or even an actual holiday or season. What are you most looking forward to this Halloween? Something like that can be a great way to get people to respond. What you don't want to do is interrupt. And that may sound really obvious, but it's amazing how many people interrupt when they hear something that they want to share. So for example, let's say I'm talking about my last trip to Hawaii and how amazing it was. And you might interrupt and go, oh my gosh, I went to Hawaii too. That snorkeling was amazing. Then we went out to this incredible restaurant, and then we went here, and then we did that. And suddenly you now have hijacked that conversation. A good rule of thumb when you want to relate to someone by sharing something related to what they have said is to make sure that you don't talk as a response more than 30 seconds. And that is not something, I recognize you're not going to be sitting there with a timer, but it's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. Have I talked more than 30 seconds? A lot of times people hijack a conversation for a couple of minutes, and then that person that was talking and was excited to share about their experience in Hawaii has now been shut down. This happens a lot in the workplace. Keep in mind, be the person that asks more questions and pauses longer to listen. The second one is to speak with clarity. Going back to 5 tips to be memorable, speaking with clarity. On a mechanical note, it is literally speaking with clarity, meaning articulate, pause, punctuate. So often in the spoken word, we forget that punctuation exists. We end up talking in a bunch of run-on sentences, and we don't stop, pause, breathe, and then move on to the next sentence. We need to remember that speaking with clarity is really important
This also includes not swallowing your sentences or your words and not swallowing or petering out at the end of your sentence. Sometimes people start strong and then they kind of dive down. So you want to start strong and end strong equally. That's going to keep people listening. That's going to make you more memorable. Another component to speaking with clarity is to make sure that you are getting to the point quickly. Bottom line up front, bluff. That's that US military term where when we have that bottom line up front, we're going to sound a lot stronger. We're going to get people to listen more and they're going to be more engaged. And ultimately, then you are going to be more memorable. The third one is to smile. Can you hear me smiling? For those of you that are listening and not watching, can you hear me that I'm smiling? I think you can. Too often, we tend to have a furrowed brow or a serious face, or as some people are familiar with, the RBF, that resting B face. And when we do that, we come across as unapproachable and uninviting. I can still remember to this day, this guy that was in one of my training classes who I met in the morning, shook his hand, and I thought, oh gosh, I have to deal with this guy all day. He came across as very stern and almost intimidating and definitely not friendly. Well, many of you know that I record people all the time. So I recorded him. We watched it back and he said, oh my gosh, I look so mean and intimidating. And I said, I know, that's exactly what I thought of you too. And he laughed and I laughed. And the thing that was so powerful is that he was a really nice guy and he was funny. But that is not the impression that he gave off. So it's important to remember, is the way that you're coming across aligned with how you want to come across? And most of the time, you'll never know that. Well, you'll never know that without feedback. You'll never truly know that if you don't record yourself or you don't ask someone how you're coming across. And I would recommend that you do both because that's the best way to see and understand how you're coming off. The story from my life is when I was starting in corporate training, had studied really hard for a training class that I was going to teach. And my boss and me met at the top of a skyscraper in San Francisco. And my goal was to deliver that training to her. And then she would decide if I was good enough to be in front of clients. Well, I finished and she asked how I did. I said, I think I did great. I think I nailed it, actually. That's what I was thinking inside. And she said, well, Karen, if I really listen, your content is practically perfect. But the problem is you look pissed off the entire time. And I went, what? I couldn't believe it. So when we saw the video, I was shocked because I did look mean. I did look rude. I looked really uninterested and I had a total furrowed brow rather than a lightness to my expression. And that is when I coined the phrase, you cannot sacrifice connection for perfection. Too often we are trying to have perfect content. We're trying to memorize our talks. We're trying to be married to our notes to make sure we don't miss a darn thing. And the problem is we're going to miss connecting with the audience if all we're focused on is our content and we forget that they are trying to decide unconsciously. They are deciding, they're not trying, they are deciding in the moment if they want to keep listening to us or not because of how we come across. And if we are not smiling or we don't have a lightness to our expression, we are going to come across as maybe rude, intimidating, unfriendly, unapproachable, and unrelatable. Lots of benefits to changing that up. And it does not mean that I'm suggesting you smile from ear to ear all the time. It simply means that you have a lightness to your expression where you raise your eyebrows occasionally and think about the content that you're saying. When you're delivering a positive message, smile. Show that, like when you're talking, even if you have bad news to deliver or it's a very serious topic, you always can deliver a message with hope. And when you think about, like let's say quarter two, we were down numbers and things were not looking good. But quarter three, we are looking better. So you can smile during that. Keep that in mind. Make sure that your message matches your facial expression. Number 4 is to make your message relevant. This is really important. Do some research in advance. Figure out, who is my audience? What do they care about? What matters to them? You want to avoid the curse of knowledge, because what that means, just so we're all on the same page, is the more expert you are in your topic or your field, the harder it is to see things through the lens of your listener. And that is why we have to be extra intentional to focus on our listener and think about them in advance. What matters to them? What do they care about? Why would even what you're talking about resonate with them? How can you make it relevant? This is really powerful to look in advance, determine what is their day-to-day world like as much as you can. You might have a mixed audience, but as much as you can, figure out what is it that matters to them, what's happening in their world right now. Do some research on their organization or on them personally. Always check out people's LinkedIn profiles or Instagram, depending upon where your audience is. That's the best way to see what do they care about, and that can help you to bring things up that they will connect with. The other one, number 5, is to tell stories and examples. There is so much power in storytelling. And a lot of people think that they have to be this amazing storyteller. You do not have to be an amazing storyteller. Just tell a story, give an example, and practice with someone. You don't have to worry about all of this story structure and art and everything. That's all great. But for the average person, sharing an example, what happened, here are the events, leaving in enough detail where you've got some emotion and detail enough that people can see it and picture it. That's really good when you can show that, and not making it so long and drawn out that it gets boring. This is why getting feedback is really important, and recording yourself and listening or watching it back is so important. Tell those stories, keep them short. I would think about it, if you want some tips on structure around story or time-wise, I would do your best to see if you can tell 1 minute or less stories. See if you can give an example in a short period of time. And you can think about it from a 3 structure if you want some structure. I know I just said, don't worry about structure, but if you want it, think about something where something happened, an event happened, something happened to you, and then what was the result of that? So it's like cause and effect. And then what was the impact, or what was the lesson? So when I teach storytelling in my course, I talk about an example. So 3-part example. When I moved to San Francisco, so there's the event, I was following a dream to move to a city that I had always wanted to live in. So there was the event. There were a lot of effects of that event. And this is another good reminder that when you're telling a story, you don't have to tell everything. Pick one thing. When I'm talking about this example, I usually am talking about how I found my calling here. I moved to San Francisco, followed that dream, and as a result of moving here, that is really where I realized I love developing people and speaking on stages. The impact of that, or the lesson that I learned, is that following your dreams with intention can help you also make an impact on other people. And now I'm helping people to speak up and ask for what they want, and most importantly, to get it. So that's a way that you can do that. Now, I didn't give any concrete detail in there. If I were to build that out a little bit more, I would say in 1994, so there's a detail for you. In 1994, I packed up a bunch of stuff in the trunk of my car and went on a road trip to follow my dream of living in San Francisco. Notice there, what are the visuals? You can picture this happening. First of all, it's 1994, so you have a year reference. You have the picturing of a bunch of bags stuffed in the trunk of a car, and then you can imagine this road trip. All of that is designed to share with some details so that you can remember it. And I won't get into a ton more detail on that, but because I don't want to make this all about storytelling. But the memorability factor is really key when you can add in emotion as well as concrete detail. And then notice how, alternatively, I could have told you in 1994, I was dating this Swiss guy, and we had just been, we just done this year-long road trip in Europe, or not road trip, year-long stint in Europe. And then I went to my parents' house and I was trying to decide, should I move this summer? Should I not move this summer? And then we put a bunch of stuff in the trunk of the car. And you can see how like this boring. It's too long. Just say the most important things. In 1994, I followed a dream to live in San Francisco, put a bunch of stuff in the trunk of my car, moved here, and never left. On a professional note, I can still remember the first day that I was walking through Times Square, no, not Times Square, Union Square, and I saw a big sign in front of the store, Limited Express, if you remember that retailer, that said managers wanted. And I thought, "Oh, I want to be a manager." And I went in, interviewed, got the job, learned very quickly that retail was not for me, but I did learn that I loved to develop people. And from there, I went on to blah, 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 blah. So that's just part of one story. But notice how there's a few details in there. You got to pick and choose. And this is why practicing, recording yourself, getting feedback from other people. Was that too long? Which detail was important? Because a lot of times the detail that we think is important isn't actually landing. And I remember a specific example where I was coaching someone on a story that she was sharing. And she said, well, let me tell you how I normally tell it. And she must have spent a good minute talking about being in a stairwell and how funny it was. Oh, we went up these stairs and then we saw this and it was so funny. Ha ha. Ha. And she kept talking and I was thinking, this is so boring. I said, get us out of the stairwell, please. Just say you were in a stairwell and it was really scary or something like that. Or there were, 150 steps in the stairwell or blah, blah, blah. And then we did this. Be careful about getting too long in one place. Speaking of getting too long in one place, let's review about the 5 tips to be memorable. Number 1, ask questions and listen. Number 2, speak with clarity, meaning get to the point as well as articulate your voice. Number 3, smile, have expression that matches the things that you're talking about, and recognize how powerful likability is. And that's directly linked to warmth and connection through your smile. The 4th is to make your message relevant. Make sure that you we'll get to that on number 5. Make your message relevant to your audience. Think about what they would care about and why they would care about it, and do some research on them. Number 5, tell stories and or examples. Those 5 things will help you to stand out with unshakable confidence in any situation. And remember, if you haven't grabbed my 9 tips to, no, and remember, if you haven't grabbed my 9 words to avoid and what to say instead, go to my website, and that will also get you on my weekly email list so that you can get those tips every week. And have a wonderful rest of your day, night, morning, or wherever it is, and whatever time it is in your time zone.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.